This is part 3 of the loafing shed build, the framing portion. The inside dimension of our post brackets are 5.5 inches, and we had to drive 30 minutes away to get pressure treated posts that were nominally 6 inches, 5.5 actual, but here they are lined up where they're going to go. We made a couple different trips to the lumber store, and we first picked up our girts, beams, and a few 2x4s for bracing the posts. I want to recommend that you check out your local lumber store that isn't your big box store. We bought this from our local lumber yard, and the price was surprisingly cheap and the wood was in great shape compared to the big box store. Plus, it was way easier to load it into the trailer. Here, the posts are up in their brackets intact with a nail on each side and braced with two 2x4s using the concrete stakes. These 10-footers look massive, and as I'm looking up, I'm just sitting here wondering if this building really needs to be this tall. But I know once we add in that pea gravel, add in the rafters, it won't feel quite as big. Most of the girts are up here. They are 2x6s attached with 4-inch ring shank galvanized nails, and Eric is now installing the screws that came with the post brackets. I want to give a little recommendation. Finding the 4-inch ring shank nails was not easy. Our local stores didn't carry them or were out of stock, and the suppliers online were going to take weeks to ship to us, and we were eager to get started. I checked eBay and found a couple listings that were selling these nails with free shipping and a faster ship rate than some of the online suppliers. So I just wanted to suggest check eBay for some of the things you need. You never know what you'll find. Next, Eric is attaching the beams, which are 2x10s, with 6 Simpson strong tie number 10 2.5-inch long screws as called out by our engineering plan. Along the long sides, they stick out beyond the posts by 1.5 inches, and the end rafters will snug up in between them. The 2x10s are heavy and hard to just hold for a long period of time, so I just wanted to show how Eric is using clamps and blocks of wood to help him hold up the beams. I mean, he really doesn't need me for any of this, so I just wanted to show you, if you are alone, it is possible to do this by yourself. Here we've got most of the girts, and our beams are now up. There are 2 more beams on each long side that go up after the rafters are in. Next, Eric installed the grade boards, and I just wanted to show here how Eric notched the grade board to accommodate the bracket and the hex screws that protrude. The grade boards are all nailed in, and they are 2x6 ground contact boards. We bought our second batch of wood from the lumber store to include the rafters, which are 2x10 by 12s. Eric is measuring and cutting the required angle for a 212 pitch on each side of each board. Here we're putting up an end rafter. Eric starts the screws on each side so no one has to be holding them or fumbling around while also holding up the board. This one was a little bit snug, but it got into place with a little bit of persuasion. Kona is always close by supervising, especially if there's a good shady spot. Okay, so the end rafters and the two center rafters are in. The center rafters just attach directly to the center posts. Next, we're marking out the spacing for the rafter hangers on the beams on both the front and the back. So who doesn't need an excuse to buy new tools? We bought this framing nailer because it can shoot a range of nails from 1.5 up to 3.5 inches with interchangeable tips. These are the 1.5 inch metal connector nails for the rafter hangers. So anyway, it's not just a single purpose nailer, which a lot of them are. We'll be able to use this for a couple different points on this project. We tried a couple different things as far as how to install the hangers and rafters. The first method here was attaching the hanger to the rafter first on the ground and then lifting it up and nailing the hanger into the beams. But what Eric ultimately decided he liked was to pre-bend the hanger to about 90 degrees and install them into the beams and then put the rafter in. So here I'm pre-bending the hangers and then I kind of staged them along the beam according to the marks that were made earlier. And here all of the rafters are up. This is really starting to look like a building. So we actually have one more girt to install, which is this short angled piece. Eric cut the angle and then we cut it to length and then attached it to the rafter with this metal plate. The last thing we have to do before installing plywood is the blocking. So we used scrap and we did have to buy a couple extra 2x4s and we installed them at every point where the metal panels would overlap. Eric would call out the measurements, I would make the cut on the miter saw, so this went super fast. This actually isn't something we thought we needed, but the engineer had us add them in. Now we can start putting up the plywood. Because the posts are on piers, this plywood is very important structurally. It provides shear strength to this building. A lot of loafing sheds like this have wood on the bottom half, but we will have plywood going basically to the top all the way around. So Eric marked on the beam where the plywood should line up and cut the plywood to length. The plywood is curling pretty badly, so there's some clamps there to help with holding it back. The plywood is installed with 3.5 inch nails, 4 inches apart around the edge and 6 inches in the field. The pieces of plywood that were cut from the back pieces are used on the front. This is one of the beams. Eric cut an angle so that it would snug up into the rafters. He later said that it wasn't necessary. I think the engineer said it wasn't necessary either, but we did it. I just want to provide a little warning here. We put our perfect boards on the ground. We got some weather. It was a few days since we got to come back out here and work, and the boards got warped. It was such a bummer. So my recommendation is to store your boards on a nice, flat, dry spot. All the beams are now installed. This is a beefy building. It is not going anywhere. Here you can see the hurricane ties are now installed. There's one on each rafter on each side with metal connector nails. Now we're going to finish up putting the rest of the plywood up on the building. I wanted to show here how we got the plywood up into place. So we set up this concrete block, a little wooden block, and one of the concrete stakes. So we would set the plywood on the concrete stake, Eric would hold it up, and I would push down on the stake to raise the plywood up into place while Eric would then nail it in. We are coming up on the home stretch as far as the framing goes. We're starting the purlins here. Okay, so they're all up, but I just wanted to hop up here and kind of show you a little bit how we went about doing this. So we marked the purlins every 2 feet like this. So I marked them on the ground, and then Eric would mark on the rafters, marks right here, where the purlin needed to go as far as how far up the rafter needed to go. I would hand him the purlin, and then he would line up the purlin with the marks on the rafters. The very last thing that we have to do as far as the framing goes is the diagonal braces that get attached on the bottom of the rafters. So there's 2, one on each side, and that's it. That's the very last thing for our framing. This is super exciting. We now have an inspection that we have to schedule, and we have to order our metal siding, and that will be the last part of this video series.